And welcome to the February 8th meeting of the Legislative Affairs Committee of the Fitchburg City Council. I now call this meeting to order. Please be advised that FATV is conducting audio and video recording of this meeting for public broadcast. I would ask that anyone else in the audience who is recording this meeting please identify themselves for the record now by standing and stating your name and city of residence. Seeing none, excuse me just one moment. I see something is disconnected here. Or turn off or something. It looks like there's something unclicked down the podium. Oh, well, that would be the simple solution.
You have to turn it on.
Live and learn. Yeah.
There you go.
See what I mean? Learning something every day still. Thank you. Members present this evening, from my left to my right, Councillor Kuchar, Vice President Van Hazinga, myself, Anthony Zarella, Councillor Walsh, and Councillor Cragen. This evening we have a number of items on the agenda. With the consent of my fellow committee members, we'll take them a bit out of order to try and make this move as smoothly as possible. I'm also going to ask that any public comment be held until the applicable item, so as to enable it to be remembered, because we're going to have quite a bit of time between public comment and some items. So I would like to begin with 00724. James C. Pappas and 3 signatory voters to amend Order 23403 to correct errors in the title record as outlined in the enclosed petition. I don't believe we have anyone presenting on behalf of this, but I've had a chance to look it over. Have you guys had a chance to look it over?
Yes.
Yep.
It appears to be a fairly routine cleanup of the record. Does anyone have any comments, concerns, anything of that nature on this item?
Motion to approve.
Yeah, it just looks like something was missed in the filing when that transaction was made many years ago. So I have no problem with it.
Motion to approve.
Second?
I have a motion and second to approve 00724. If there is no objection, it is unanimously approved. Next, we have 00924, an ordinance amending Article 8 entitled Snow or Ice on Motor Vehicles as outlined in the enclosed ordinance. I don't believe we have Sergeant Boudreau here, but councillors?
If I remember correctly, this already went through the process, but it just was not formally adopted into the city code. So we've had a lot of discussions about this.
I think you're correct.
Adds restrictions on moving snow into the public way.
And also, I believe it modifies the fines for driving a vehicle with snow on the roof.
Yes.
I'll just say I'm happy to pass this, as I have been one of the drivers behind one of those vehicles and gotten a sheet of snow to my windshield. Any further comment on this item?
Motion to approve.
Second?
All right, I have a motion and second. If there is no objection, that is also unanimously approved. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten to ask, was anyone here in the audience here to speak on either of those two items? All right. Next, we have 01624. Councillor Boschman to amend Chapter 169-58 of the City Code with respect to penalties for violations of snow parking bans as enclosed in the attached petition. Councillor Boschman, as you are the sponsor of this legislation, you can present to the council or to the committee.
Many of you weren't around at the time when I first came on the council. Prior to this petition, we used to have a parking ban starting probably sometime in October. It was the first snowstorm on November 1st, whatever came first, from approximately 12 o'clock until 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. You could not park on the city streets whatsoever. And then in 2013, 2014, I believe, when I first came on the council, we changed the rules. So we allowed people to park on the city streets when there was no snowstorm, with the understanding that they would move their cars when it was a snow emergency or it was declared a snow emergency and they had to find a place to park. My argument is, right now, is that $30 fine is not sufficient. We're encouraging people. We're not hindering people from parking on the streets. You can't plow your driveway for $30. It costs you more than $30 to park your car, to plow your driveway. It costs about $40 to $50, if not more. So, and we're paying $100 an hour to hire contractors to come in, and they go around the cars, and I talked to a couple of the contractors, and they said it's very, very hard to plow the city streets in Fitchburg with cars parked on the street. They can't do a good job. They got to go way around because they're afraid to damage their cars. So then what they do is they take pictures after the next day, and they post it on Facebook, and they say, look at this, they did a lousy job on our street. And so we got to go back and clean up the mess. So that $30 is costing us more money to pave. And the other thing, I was talking to my friend behind me, and he made a very good point. We're making it kind of rough for the police department or even the tow people to go out in bad weather to start ticketing or towing when there's a major snowstorm. They got to bend down into the snow, hook it up, and tow it away. I believe at a $100 fine on a $100 ticket, you'll think twice about keeping your car on the road. You'll find a place for it. Now, we're not asking for a lot here. I'm not asking for a lot. It's only 11 times out of the year that we're asking, approximately 11 times. It could be 15, but basically about 11 times if you compare the last 10 years that I've been on. We've only been having about 10 storms a year. 10 times a year till 15 to move your car. I don't think the city of Fitchburg is being unrealistic to ask you to move your car so they can plow the city streets fair. And I'm pushing for this $100 because I think it's only fair to the people that abide by the rules and they move their cars off of the roads, and for the homeowners that paying the taxes of the city of Fitchburg to try to help them keep the costs down, to do the streets once, and that's all we have to do. Not go back and make them wider because Boschman didn't want to move his car. And Boschman didn't get a ticket, but Boschman kept his car there, and they went around it, and all I did was make a phone call, hey, you didn't do my street right, and they come back up and push it out, and I didn't have to do any work at all. So that's why this is it. This is to make the people, the party that are responsible, think about what they're doing at $100. $100, when you get paid, if you have to pay $100, you're going to think twice about parking on the city streets when there's an emergency. So that's why I put the petition in. I've been trying for years to get the cost up higher, and I think you were on the council president. You guys didn't want to go up. We had a major snowstorm, and I give you, it was right in the front, right after we had a meeting, as a matter of fact, right on Wallace Ave, major storm, and what came up there? 2 cars parked right on the street on Wallace Ave, never moved it, and we had about 15 to 20 inches of snow on it, and you could see it all over the cars. So that's why I asked. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did I have anyone wishing to speak on this item? Come on up.
Thank you very much. My name is Tom Donnelly. I want to thank you for your service. Council Boschman presented it very eloquently. I've been doing property management since 1972, primarily in the Fitchburg State area, dealing with students for 22 years, and I stopped doing it in 1994. But I was on the council when we passed it, so that I only went along. I was not in favor of it. I like the parking ban because it forced landlords to provide parking for their tenants. So it was a way to make it more convenient for some people that don't have convenient parking. But as Councilor Boschman said, if you're a police officer, if you're a tow truck driver, if you're any of these people, you are putting them, I'll say we are putting them in the worst possible situation, even towing or ticketing or being around with the blue lights flashing when cars are coming by and tow trucks in the worst conditions. Temperature, wet, cold. I just think Fitchburg, I've been an advocate for years. I ran for politics only because I tried to use some of the knowledge that I have to make our neighborhoods better. If our neighborhoods are better, the city's better. I would say there's more flagrant ignoring of the law in some of the most congested neighborhoods. And some of these are the same people that speed, go through red lights, ignore stop signs. It's the people who don't care. I don't understand why we reward those people when 80 and 90 and 95% of people obey the law. The ticket's not a criminal offense. It's not going to be on their record. But I'm just trying to, I can give you 50 years of experience. 2 minutes doesn't really cut it. But
I
just
understand.
think that if Fitchburg
have to
wants to
apply
be
the
better,
rule
we
to
have to
everyone
raise
equally,
the
though.
bar, not keep the bar low. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on this item? All right. Any questions from committee members for Mr. Boschman? All right. Any deliberation?
Just have one point that, so cars violating the ordinance can be ticketed, but they also can be towed. And they are subject to additional charges if their car is towed, both to the city and also to the towing lot for vehicle storage towing to get it back. So the fines may start at $30, but they do climb much higher in effect if a car is towed. Just something to keep in mind.
Although I do appreciate that, and you are correct, Counselor. Bringing the initial fine up to $100, I think, would be an incentive for people. I mean, I've seen this in my ward. I've seen this in other wards. It is a problem, and I think we should increase the fine in order to entice people to actually abide by the law and move their car when they're supposed to. Mr. Boschman is right. We've had, knock on wood, a very mild winter so far. I hope we don't have much more snow. But it's only a few times out of the year that we ask to please do your civic duty, remove your car so we can clean up your streets. How many times just this year have we heard people complaining, oh, the streets are so bad with plowing that we don't, there are cars still left on the streets, the plows can't do their job, and it does cost us quite a pretty penny to employ these plow drivers. And if they can't because of actions of our residents by not abiding by the law, if we have to pay more, they should have to pay more.
For my part, I would agree. I think this is a simple example of just attempting to internalize the externalities. This is different from a typical parking violation where the threat of towing can be much more effective because it's difficult to get a tow truck out quickly in a snowstorm, especially if the street's not plowed. And if we wait until the next morning, well, then they're not in violation anymore. So why are we towing them? So I very much appreciate your point, Counselor. And I think in most parking violation cases, that is the appropriate remedy. But in this case, where it can be very difficult to impose that sanction before the reason for doing so has expired, it doesn't seem to be a very effective deterrent. Anyone over here? Councilor Walsh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about, it says it's going to amend B2, but and we've been talking about the parking bans and snow emergencies, which is actually in Group C.
Yes, that is, oh, I'm sorry, did I write that up wrong? That is, yes, it is supposed to be moving that.
And maybe I missed something.
Oh,
when I
I'm
read
sorry.
it.
That's a good point. That's not actually an error. It's an oddity of the way the ordinance is written. We have groups A, B, C, but the actual subsections of the ordinance are numbered B1,
All right.
B2, B3.
Okay.
So B3 refers to group C.
Okay.
So the way this is worded to clean up the language and everything looks pretty complex, but all it really does, literally all it does, is alter the fine for this one offense from 30 to 100.
Okay.
Councillor Cragen, I saw your hand.
No, I'm happy to hear from Councillor Boschman. I drive in many parts of Councillor's ward, and I see the result of an improperly plowed street. And given the cost involved, and good to know it's $100 an hour, I would be in support of raising that fine.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and second to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It is unanimous. All right. Next, we have 03624, a proposal by Councillor Fleming, who is with us on Zoom, to accept local option statute MGL Chapter 140, Section 139C, which exempts dogs owned by persons over 70 years of age from dog licensure fees. Councillor Fleming, would you like to present?
Good evening. Thank you. Yes, this was actually brought to my attention by a constituent a couple of weeks ago, which I didn't even know this law existed. So I emailed Joanna to see if she knew anything about it. And she said, yeah, this is a law that we have just never passed, but it is on the books. And all I'm trying to do is get it passed. I mean, I think it's only fair where our seniors who actually have these dogs, a lot of them as for therapeutic reasons, to not have to charge them that extra fee every year to keep their dog. So, you know, they're on fixed incomes. It gets more difficult for them to pay their bills with rising costs of everything. I think this would just be a good way to help them out, to keep those dogs that serve a great purpose to them.
And do I have anyone here wishing to engage in public comment on this item?
Thank you. I didn't plan on speaking. I didn't know this was up, but I have two dogs and I'm over 70. Fitchburg has a thing about giving things away for free. It's a poor city, or is it a poorly run city? But I mean, you can't expect services. You have a dog officer, a dog control, animal control, some sort of somebody, and somebody has to pay for those. Now, I think my wife just made the check out for two dogs. Now, it's $15 a piece. I know people have spent thousands of dollars for veterinary. I mean, the counselor will know more about the animals and how much things cost, but I just cannot keep giving everything for free. So I'm in that category where I'm allowed to speak, and I'm paying for two, and it's a discount if they're spayed or neutered. So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on this item? All right. Questions, comments from council?
Sure. I'm in touch with all kinds of residents, and some struggle. I have a resident who recently was feeding the cat tuna food, like StarKist, because cat food is not covered by food stamps. So I supplied this resident with a case of cat food, and we're going to figure out, thank you, Councillor Walsh, for providing a case of cat food, which I had. But there are a lot of people who, for that $9 or, 18, again, neutered dogs are $9, unneutered dogs are $15, for whom that does matter. And I have met enough of those folks to say that I am in support of this, and I really appreciate Councillor Fleming bringing this forward. Thank you. Former Councillor Donnelly, you don't have to pay $15. You could pay more. You could pay more if you wanted. Doesn't have to be that. Yield the floor.
Councillor Kuchar?
I have a quick question. This is only about the fee. It doesn't prevent them from having to get a license. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. Because, there's a lot of health concerns, because licenses are there to make sure that, you have an updated rabies, you have, distemper, you have certain aspects of it where the license monitors the animals. So as long as they have to, thank you. As long as they have to still maintain the health of their animal, I have no problem with this.
All right. Councillor Van Hasinga?
I think it's been stated that, this is not a very big fee. This is $15 a year or $9 if they're spay or neutered. And it dwarfs the cost of actually owning and taking care of and feeding a pet. And there are, as Mr. Donnelly stated, there are real costs associated with maintaining this registry and keeping up to date on it, and also animal control, that we have real expenses associated with people owning dogs in the city. So if we're going to give up this portion of the revenue stream, there is an impact. Granted, it's not going to be huge, but the cost also isn't huge. This is a relatively minor expense, considering the other expenses of owning a pet. So I'm questioning whether or not it's needed.
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
I think that just because this passes doesn't mean that people can't pay it if they wish to. Personally, I would qualify under this, but I would continue to pay. I have 2 dogs. We just licensed them, and I will continue to do so, and I will pay the fee. So.
And for my part, I think the size of the the size of the fee is interesting in that I feel there's not likely a large enough number of these fees collected from residents over 70 to make a significant impact on the city budget one way or the other. And at the same time, the only people who will really feel a benefit from this are exactly the people who have the least to work with. They may very well already be paying the costs of owning a pet, but they may have that budgeted out to the dime. I know people in my extended family who are on those kinds of budgets, where giving them an additional $15 to work with makes a difference. And for the people for whom it won't make any difference, for the people for whom $15 is a daily or weekly expense that they don't even think about, they are certainly welcome and encouraged to continue to contribute to the cost of animal control in the city of Fitchburg. I don't own any pets, and I'm not over 70, but I would have no problem contributing freely if I did. But there are a small number of residents who genuinely could use that small extra amount of pocket money because they're riding the edge budget-wise. Counselor?
I just had one more thing to add that comes to mind, that the reason why there's a difference in fee between the spay or neuter dog and the not is to incentivize owners to spay and neuter their dogs. And Councillor Craig goes to great efforts to promote this with cats, because it makes a real difference in managing the pet population in the city. If we're going to waive this fee for a segment of the population, it eliminates that incentive. That is an unforeseen side effect. So, granted, this isn't the end of the world if this passes, but for me, I don't think it's warranted.
Okay. Any further deliberation on this topic? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved. I'll second.
That's a motion for,
To approve.
okay. I assumed, but, all right, I have a motion and second to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
In opposition?
Okay.
Motion passes by a vote of 4-1. Now, next we have 27023. This is Councillor Fleming again, on behalf of Ward 5 residents to relocate the election polling site, either back to Simon Park or any other suitable location. I want to note before we begin that in my opinion at least, my fellow committee members may feel differently. I don't think we'll be able to make a final decision on this tonight. We still don't have quite enough data to pick a new polling site right now. But if the committee would like to discuss the preliminaries so that we know what information we should go out looking for, and get a sense for how people are thinking about this, then this would be the time to proceed. Councillor Fleming, did you have anything you'd like to add to this item?
I would. Just based on the other polling locations and the last meeting that we had on this, I found it interesting that a few of the councilors felt the need to keep it down in the Main Street area, which I really didn't understand, where the majority of the residents are not in the downtown area. Many of them have to get in their car and drive. There are so many options now to vote that to keep it in the downtown area just so a handful of people can walk is really unfair to the rest of the ward, where many of them have to travel 6 miles to get to this location and then deal with the traffic concerns. My mother-in-law goes by 2 other polling locations before she gets to her location, which is not centrally located. So I really think when we make this decision, we need to really consider outside the box and not keeping everything right down in the Main Street and College area, because we do have transportation that is provided. People can go to City Hall and vote early. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
All right. Anyone here wishing to comment on this item?
Again, I repeat.
Just a reminder, as you are not the sponsor of this, you will have 2 minutes.
Okay, I understand that. Just a reminder, I just want to tell you, some of you guys were not on the council back in 2013, 2014. The reason why we voted this to move from Simon Park to downtown Fitchburg was to, number one, the main concern was to attract people to downtown. That's all we hear about is we got to bring more people downtown. We have to bring people downtown so we can show them the new shops and everything else. Because I can give you prime examples up in my ward. They don't even know where downtown is. Up there, off a road, up in your ward, up there, way up on the hill. They go different directions. And the other reason why we did it was for the people that could not get up there. They had to take a bus up to Simon Park. Now, we can say the exact same thing. You get early mailing, and you can come downtown and vote at City Hall early, too. So there's really no difference. But the whole purpose of us moving it from Simon Park to downtown was to draw people downtown, because we're trying to develop downtown. And that's what we're trying to do, not push them apart. If we're going to sit here tonight and say, no, we don't care, we're going to put it back up in Slimer Park. Don't waste my time about downtown Fitchburg. That's what I'm going to say to you at a council meeting. Don't waste my time, because we're not doing our job to bring people downtown. You hear the mayor saying it all the time. You hear different merchants saying it. We got to bring people downtown. And that's the reason why we did what we did. Thank you. I got 19 seconds.
I do see your hand, Councillor Fleming. As you are not a member of the committee, however, I can't allow you to engage in rebuttal. Mr. Vera?
Good evening. I do want to say, I do echo Councillor Boschman's sentiment. However, I know that there is a big population in Ward 5 that doesn't have the transportation. Yes, we do provide transportation, and yes, there's better ways to vote. But I think that we need to take into consideration, like you said earlier, this is a bigger issue, and the city clerk said that I could share tonight that there is a different strategy going in, so all the polling locations might change in the future. So if we were to decide something tonight, then it's probably going to come up again to change it again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I've been somewhat involved with Ward 5 my entire life. At the hearing, I was on the council a few years ago, and there were a number of people that walk to the polls. And if they can't walk to the poll, I know they could do mail-in, I know they could do early voting, but I think downtown has been repeated over and over and over of how we're going to develop it. Some people think it's a scary place to be. I think we have to show that it's not a scary place. Parking was brought up last time, that they have to use the parking garage and walk across Main Street, which was absolutely false. And I just think we're supposed to be inclusionary, not exclusionary. That Slimer Park, I was there at a breakfast a couple of weeks ago, wonderful, but it's a couple miles out. So I really think we should be inclusionary, and I think we should support Main Street or downtown until there's a real problem. If they build the new units over there on the corner of Main and Day Street, we might have a parking problem. But at the moment, I don't think we do, and I think we should help the people. Ward 5B is the lowest voting ward historically, as far back as you can remember. So I think we should try and help those people as much as we can. Thank you.
Any further public comment? I saw Councillor Van Hazinga's hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm fully open to looking at better places to hold the polling place, and I think the city clerk has a plan for next year that's going to work to move these all to municipal buildings. So I think any change that we made would be temporary, and I think we should just sort of stick out what we have and get through and then make a plan for next year. But in regards to the statement that most of the residents don't live downtown, Ward 5B, which is roughly half the population of the ward, is entirely downtown. It's almost entirely within the boundaries of Pearl Street and John Fitch Highway. That's the core urban area of the city where the polling place is presently located. And most densely populated areas in 5A are close to 5B. And these are the areas that, like Mr. Vera said, where if people don't have a car, they are most likely to live in these areas. And transportation issues are a real problem. There are many people who walk in this city that don't have regular transportation that they can depend on to drive to North Fitchburg. So I think as we find a place, we have to keep those things in mind and make sure the polling place is as accessible as possible to the greatest number of people, because we need people to vote, and that is a challenge to get turnout, to get people to vote, and moving it to a remote area of the city, I don't believe is the answer.
Councillor Walsh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think in light of Mr. Vera's comments with regard to the plan by the city clerk, that I think it sort of makes this moot. I don't see the point in exploring other options when the city clerk may have a plan, and I would rather maybe table this and see what that plan is before we make any changes to voting in Ward 5.
Councillor Kuchar?
I appreciate what what Councillor Boschman and former Councillor Donnelly has to say, as well as Councillor Van Hassing, and Councillor Walsh. But I don't think this is a moot point. We had a pretty busy municipal election last year, and from my understanding, upon information and belief, there was quite a bit of traffic problems down there. I travel Main Street quite frequently. You know, traffic has increased, foot traffic has increased, and I can only see this being a safety issue. Now, I don't think it's a moot point because, yeah, we had a very busy municipal election last year. This year, we have a presidential election. And whatever issues we had last year is going to be compounded. Now, I'm glad to hear that the mayor's office is looking to, make it a little easier, or change polling locations. I'd like to see my ward residents actually vote in the ward instead of outside of the ward. But this is an issue, and I know I've talked with Councillor Fleming about the issues during the election. And I know we don't have enough information, as you said, Mr. President. I think this should be held to get more information, but I think even on a temporary basis with this upcoming presidential election coming, I do think that maybe we should temporarily move until the whatever the mayor's plan is implemented. So I would be in favor of at least holding it to get more information to try to find another location. It doesn't have to be in Selma Park, according to the petition. It says, on behalf of Ward 5 residents, to relocate the election polling site either back to Selma Park, so it's not handcuffing us to Selma Park. It says, or any other suitable location where traffic is not so dense. It doesn't just say, oh, we're moving this off of Main Street and throwing it into the woods of Ward 5. It doesn't say that. And I understand you want to see people down on Main Street. I want to see people down on Main Street. Main Street, we're having a revitalization, and it's looking great. For one day a year, and I understand you can mail-in vote, you can vote early, but for one day a year, I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference.
And I would tend to. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Cregan. Did you have something?
I just wanted to say that I have spoken to Ward 5 residents most recently during the last campaign, and I heard from people who liked going not downtown, that they were fine with heading to Simon Park when it was up there, and that everyone has made a good point. We have Main Street is getting revitalized. Traffic is more intense, and safety really has to count. The fact that the councillor has brought this petition forward on behalf of her ward speaks to me that she's in communication with her ward and people who live there. So I am inclined to view this favorably, but I understand, the idea of tabling, because hearing that, oh, we've got something else in the works, does put a level there. But I'm in support of following what our councillor recommends, because it's her ward. She knows it.
Thank you. Councillor Van Hassingen.
Yeah, so the plan is to move all of the polling locations to municipally owned properties. Because we actually have to pay to have it at Rollstone Church, the Knights of Columbus, all those other, that's an additional cost to the city, and we also don't have as much control as if it's a municipally owned building. So if we're looking for sites that are suitable for polling places, we need an open area, we need lots of parking, we need different locations throughout the city. If you look at what these locations are, they're schools.
Yep.
So what the city council, where the city clerk is working with, is the superintendent of schools to use school buildings for this purpose. So to clarify timing, when we say next year, we're actually talking about next school year, because nothing can be done this school year in terms of the calendar. So if you look at when we're going to have scheduled votes, there's the presidential primary coming up, and to be able to come to an agreement on a new spot, have everything worked out and in place before then, I'm not going to bet money on that. It's not a realistic feasibility. So we're really looking at the next election would be in November. That's after the start of the school year. That's after start. We can figure it out, and if we can schedule the school calendar, work out the details with the superintendent of schools and the school committee, we can hold the polling places in municipal buildings and schools, then this will work. So we don't need to take action. We can't feasibly take action now for the next election. This will affect. The next feasible election will be after the start of the school year, and we should be able to get this next plan in place. So.
Thank you. So I pretty much agree with very nearly everything that's been said on both sides. I don't mean that to sound wishy-washy. I do think that from what I've heard, the current location is not ideal. Actually, I was going to ask Councillor Fleming for information on this, again, keeping in mind that I can't allow you to deliberate. What particular types of issues did you observe with this location at the prior election?
Oh my gosh, so many. Well, you have everybody standing on the street holding, their signs or running. Then you have people pulling up in their cars who happen to know the people on the sidewalk, stopping traffic. You have people just standing on the street, lack of parking, people unable to get in and out of the entrance of out of the church. It was just a cluster down there. And then you have those coming off the train that, stopping, not sure what's going on, no place for them to walk, not sure what's going on, not aware there's an election going on. So it was numerous issues that we really encountered this last election. The previous election, it was bad, but this past election just brought it to a new level. And I think it's because it was a very active, full, election.
Mm-hmm.
We're more
right.
involved.
Yeah, thank you. So I would agree that fits basically with what I observed at Ward 5 this past election. And certainly I want to draw people downtown, but I would tend to agree that bringing them downtown one day a year when they're really focused on the election, not on anything else around them, is not going to be the thing that brings them to downtown business, especially when the location is on that end of Main Street, which is not where we're bringing in most of our new businesses. As to the issue about Ward 5B voters, I agree. We want to drive turnout up any way we can. What I would be curious to see, and I am making a note for myself to check with the city clerk on this, is in the last several elections that we've been at that location, has there in fact been an increased turnout in Ward B that sort of exceeds the trend of the turnout citywide? If there is, then that's evidence that it actually is encouraging Ward 5B voters to vote more. If there isn't, then it may be an idea that sounds like it would encourage them, but if it isn't actually, then, I'm not sure that's relevant to our decision. But I will say that I've been working with the city clerk really since just after the election on this issue. Not Ward 5 specifically, but the idea of rethinking the polling locations. There are a lot of advantages to moving them into municipal buildings. The one that I haven't heard mentioned yet is also it just allows the voters, the taxpayers, to see what we're paying for. Bring them into these city buildings and say, look, this is what we're doing with your tax dollars. So I am broadly in favor of moving this to a new location. I am not wedded to the idea of putting it back at SIMA, though I liked it at SIMA myself. I also want to provide some historical context to this. Councillor Walsh and I were the only two members of this committee who were on the council at the time that this move was made, initially. Oh, and Councillor Fleming, but I'm talking about committee members. And it was actually the result of a very procedurally irregular vote. What basically happened was we first took a vote. There was first a motion to keep it at Sima Park. That motion failed by a vote of 5-6. Myself and Councillor Green, seeing the way the vote was going, then changed our vote in the next vote, which was a motion to move it to Rollstone, with the intention of just being cooperative. We didn't want to dig in our heels and say, we're just going to have our say no matter what. We figured if this is the way the council wants to go, sure, we'll cooperate. Except instead of an 8-3 vote for the move, which is what we expected would happen, it turned into a 7-4 vote because there was a councillor who voted no to both moves and later indicated that the preference was to split the ward into precincts. I don't believe there was any other councillor who was in favor of that. Now, this has nothing to do with who was right, who was wrong. The point I'm making is there was no majority of the council that was actually in favor of the move. If everyone had voted their conscience on the second vote, it would have been another 5-6 vote against. So this was actually never a location that was endorsed by a majority of the council, except on a technical procedural level. So that said, I do think that since the city clerk and I have been working on this, and since it seems we have the support of the mayor's office in this plan, it may make sense to still investigate the possibility of a temporary move for this presidential election, but hold off on making any permanent decision until all the other wards have been reviewed as well, so that we can do it comprehensively. I don't think that tonight we have enough data to pick a temporary location. I have asked the city clerk if she would be willing to attend the next meeting of Legislative Affairs and offer some opinions on either particular locations or general information about what we need to be looking for in a polling location to narrow down our search. But for tonight, I would personally be in favor of holding this further. Councillor Kuchar.
You just mentioned something about talking to the city clerk in regards to the number of 5B voters. 2017, 199 people voted in 5B. 2019, 195 people voted in 5B. 2021, 130 people voted in 5B. And then in 2023, 266 people voted. So that should give you some sort of an indication about the turnout just in the 5B.
Right. And like I said, I would want to compare that to the trend of voting across the city, but it does seem that, with the possible exception of last year, it doesn't seem to have moved the needle.
Yeah. Motion to hold?
I have a motion to hold. Do I have a second?
2023.
I have a motion and second to hold for further information. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No opposition. Passes unanimously. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
All right. And now we come down to 00824. Because I imagine the presentation and discussion on this matter will be somewhat more lengthy, I'm going to call for public comment first. Anyone wishing to comment on 00824, please approach the center podium.
Jacqueline Wetchy, Fitchburg resident. Using a law firm as Councilors Van Hazinga and Cruz proposed at budget time will save us money. Unfortunately, some individuals in the city never learn delayed gratification and want to contact the solicitor at 11 o'clock at night instead of writing down their question and posing it during regular business hours. Our first responders need to be on call 24/7. By contrast, there is no legal emergency that justifies bothering someone at home all hours of the day and night. The option to impose on the solicitor's private time is no reason to spend twice as much on legal services as we need to. As to the assertion that Leominster has legal fees buried in departmental budgets, we do too. For instance, our school budget includes substantial payments to the law firm Merrick O'Connell. Another disadvantage of the current approach is that with a political appointee rather than use of a disinterested law firm, the solicitor's loyalty is not to the city as a whole, but to the mayor. In 2021, the solicitor said he wanted to help me get the mask mandate rescinded. I met with him for several hours and did subsequent research that I emailed to him, only to have him ghost me because he found out I was also working with someone from a different political party than the mayor's. We should have an impartial firm, not a political hack. By voting for this agenda item, you can bring a new level of professionalism to the city. You should also look into a civilian review board covering all departments to resolve
Ms. Wetchy,
issues.
that is not before us.
And also, Mr. President, you have in the past told me that I'm limited to 2 minutes total, no matter how many agenda items I wish to speak on, but you've allowed Mr. Donnelly to speak again and again. This is gender bias.
Before us.
This is gender bias.
It is a different procedure for a different meeting. This time I broke out the items one by one and allowed anyone to speak at each public comment opportunity. Had you arisen, I would have allowed it for you as well. At a typical council meeting, we have a single public comment, and everyone is limited to 2 minutes at that public comment. That is all. Any further public comment on this item? All right, Mr. Vera.
Good evening. Alexander Vera, Chief of Staff, Mayor's Office. So I ask that you pass this. As you all may know, the city solicitor is appointed by the mayor with no confirmation by the city council. The past city solicitor was an employee of the city, and so this is the reason why we need this transfer, is because, you know, our firm Mead, Tallerman and Costa are not going to be an employee of the city, and we need to pay them out of expenses. They have already started services. The continuity of legal services in the city has continued on from a former solicitor Pusateri to now Mead, Tallerman and Costa, and we just need this transfer to continue on with their services and the legal department as a whole in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilors, questions, comments for Mr. Vera or Attorney Costa? All right, I guess I will begin then. So I want to lead off by saying that, speaking only for myself, of course, nothing that I say this evening is meant in any way to reflect on the quality or professionalism of the services provided by Mead, Tallerman and Costa. Were I persuaded that the city should go with an outside counsel model, I would have no objection whatsoever to retaining this particular firm for that purpose. That being said, I do have grave concerns about the model, not about the firm. And if you'll give me a moment, I have a... Where did I put that? Sorry, I have lots of papers tonight. So first, I'd just like to start off by saying I understand that yes, the mayor has absolute authority to appoint any individual she wishes as city solicitor without approval by council. I have no wish or intention to infringe on that power. However, the question of the structure of the legal department and the means by which we fund it is a matter for the council's review. And since the council does not have direct authority over the appointment, our control over funding is the mechanism by which we can review that decision. So I have a number of concerns regarding how this fits with both our ordinances and basically the way we have done business in the city for quite some time, because this will be a lot more than a change in just who we are getting our legal services from. The first issue is simple, and if the council were to approve the transfer, we could very easily fix this issue as well, which is simply that our ordinances stipulate that the city solicitor receives a salary. It's not just the budget item, it's also an ordinance. So we would need to have a petition put in front of us to change that ordinance as well, because otherwise, though I am certain that no one at the firm has any intention of double dipping, they would be legally entitled to an additional payment in the amount of the city solicitor's salary. No one intends that, of course, so that would be something we'd have to clean up. Then the further concern is that the provision that dictates the appointment of the city solicitor, to my mind at least, fairly clearly implies that it needs to be an individual. At the moment, the named individual is Lisa Mead, but in the further specifications as to the city solicitor in our ordinances, they all refer to that individual. And so, for example, no offense, Attorney Costa, I like having you here, but technically speaking, we should have Attorney Mead here, because Attorney Costa is not the city solicitor. He's a law partner of the city solicitor. And so I don't have a full outline of how I want to go through this. I'm just going to kind of start at the start and continue. So my first question is, we have an ordinance in the city of Fitchburg. This is Chapter 3-51, 52, and then 21-11. That specify that the city can't enter into a contract until and unless the city solicitor approves it as to form and legality. Now, in the fee agreement that was sent out to us, the signed executed fee agreement, I don't see any such sign-off, and I'm curious as to who would even be doing that sign-off, because to the best of my knowledge, Attorney Pusateri was not asked to review this fee agreement before he left. And, of course, Mead, Tellerman, and Costa can't review and sign off on their own fee agreement. That would be a direct conflict of interest. So has this requirement been complied with? Either one of you. I don't mind which.
So I can address that, Council President. For the record, Adam Costa, Mead, Tellerman, and Costa. So I'm not certain whether there has been a sign-off by council, as you had pointed out, and I would concur. Certainly, we couldn't approve as to form our own contract. I've seen this done a number of ways in different communities because this sort of a provision is not unusual, whether it be in a town charter or a city ordinance. I've seen it done with special counsel. I've seen it done with an assistant solicitor or an assistant counsel because typically there is such an individual appointed, especially in a larger community, a city such as Fitchburg. But I'm not certain whether the form of agreement that we provided was stipulated as to form by outside counsel or by the city's assistant solicitor.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So my concern there is that now some people are going to think I'm a stickler for this, but the law says what it says. The ordinance that we have presently says that it has to be the city solicitor, not city solicitor or designee or, assistant. It has to be the city solicitor whose signature is on these contracts. Now, again, this is a thing that if the council were to proceed with this, we could essentially retroactively remedy it and, clean it up. But my point is there's been a lack of prior communication with council on this and a lack of dotting I's and crossing T's throughout this process in a seeming rush to make this change. And certainly, as you and I discussed, Mr. Vera, I understand, new administration, getting used to things, taking things one step at a time. It's just that in my mind, that would be a reason to slow down on something and wait until you're sure you can do it through the process.
So, with all due respect, I'm not an attorney. I'm in front of 3 attorneys now. But so the charter states that the city solicitor shall be in charge. In charge of the law department. He or she shall be appointed by the mayor in January of each year for the term of 1 year. Then it goes on saying without confirmation by the council. So, that time allotted and city solicitor Pusateri was not then reappointed. So the legality here that you're trying to stick to, that the city solicitor has to sign all contracts, kinda is a weird gray area because technically not the city solicitor anymore when it's appointed by the mayor.
So I take your point. However, if you look a little further it may be further or further up in the charter, there is a provision that states that an appointee may continue beyond their appointed term until a successor is qualified. So until a new city solicitor was appointed or until he voluntarily resigned, Solicitor Pusateri remained in office as city solicitor. I understand what you're saying, but the appointment is up to the mayor. Of course.
It doesn't say signed and agreed to by the previous solicitor.
It doesn't have to be. The appointment doesn't have to be, but the contract does. Normally, the appointment of a new city solicitor doesn't involve a new contract because we're appointing an individual who is serving as a salaried employee of the city. In this instance, there is a signed fee agreement with Meade, Tellerman, and Costa. That is a contract entered into by the city and therefore subject to 2111, which is in the ordinances, not the charter, just to be clear. So that's, Councillor Kuchar, I don't want to dominate this. Go ahead.
No, I read that, and I do not see that the fee agreement is a valid fee agreement because it was not signed off. I mean, it says, strict 3252, form of document approval, the city solicitor shall, and I know you, Mr. Vera, you're not an attorney, but when there's a shall in a statute, you better do it. It doesn't give you an option. And shall note his or her approval on all contracts, agreements, documents, or bonds that are submitted to him or her by the mayor or the various city officers, boards, or departments in the following form. And all it is literally just a signature line. a dated signature line. So that is number one. So I don't see this as a valid contract because that wasn't done. Secondly, I understand what the mayor's office is trying to do in regards to trying to save money. Being a lawyer myself, when you look at the work that former City Solicitor Pusateri was doing and the amount of hours that he was putting in versus...
we don't know the amount of hours he was putting in.
Please don't interrupt the councilors.
I apologize.
But there is information out there in regards to the hours that he was putting in. I don't have that in front of me, so I'm not going to comment on that, but there is documentation about how many hours. And it would equate roughly to about $70 an hour. Here, we have $225 an hour, which is, let's face it, not a cost-cutting savings here. In addition, we're going with, and again, I want to reiterate what President Zarella said. This has nothing to do with the firm. I have no issues with this firm. I've had to, tangle swords with some of your associates that used to be from KP Law many, many times. So I have no issue with you or your firm. Okay, this has nothing to do with you. I just know how attorneys work. Now, so that's $225 an hour. When we met in the office, you, me, and there were a few other counselors, and I got the fee agreement. And I was repeatedly asking you, are they charging for travel? I was told no. Okay? And then when I asked you, can I please see a copy of the fee agreement, you give me an unsigned copy of the fee agreement, but in paragraph 5, I believe it's 5, excuse me, no, paragraph 6 says, travel time will be billed from the firm's geologically closest location located in Millis. Millis is, at about this time of night, Millis is about an hour and 10 minutes away. Okay? So just to get here cost us over $225. Council was here at our most recent city council meeting. Not disparaging council at all, just saying that he said a total of about 6 or 7 words. That city council meeting with travel time, those 6 or 7 words cost us $675. That's just with the time that he was sitting there and the time that he gets in the car to leave Millis, if that's where he was stationed, sitting, coming all the way up to Fitchburg, and then traveling down to Millis. I don't see this being a cost-cutting savings when a local attorney can walk from a downtown Fitchburg office. Mr. Pusateri's office is right up the road here. You could walk there, and it wouldn't cost us really any travel time, because he's an employee of the city. So we're not contracting services with an employee, and the way it's set up is it shall be appointed, and he's supposed to be, the city solicitor is supposed to be an employee of the city. And the assistant city solicitor is supposed to be an employee of the city, too. Now, you're keeping on, from what I understand, you're keeping on the assistant city solicitor, which is Attorney Pollock, but yet farming out the city solicitor job to a firm that's their closest location is an hour and 10 minutes away in good traffic down 495. So I just don't see where this is a cost-cutting improvement. And I don't see, I think this is going to be a financial boondoggle for the city. And I mean, I'm not sure if the firm plans on attending every city council meeting, whether or not they're going to be Zooming in. These are all issues that, I see as, potential, but it's still, look at how long our budget meeting goes. We've been here till midnight on some years. Are we really going to be paying $225 for the city solicitor to sit there to listen to us argue over, nickels and dimes? Meanwhile, he's getting paid $125 an hour just to sit here? Oh, $225. Thank you, Mr. President. So I just see this as not a good move. I understand where the mayor's office is coming from, that they think privatizing the city council, the city solicitor, is going to improve things. That's not how it works in the legal community. I would much rather have an employee of the city be the city councilor or the city solicitor than just hire out a firm that's going to bill us out just to come here. I yield the rest of my time.
Councillor Van Hazinga?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the first step in evaluating this is the path to take is to look at what are we getting for our money. What is the quality of services that we're going to receive? And the packet we received about Lead, Tallerman, Costa is quite impressive. Attorney Mead is a former city councilor and mayor of Newburyport, former city solicitor of Somerville, one of the larger cities in our Commonwealth. They have a very long list of clients of communities that they provide legal services for. Absolutely no issue there. That is quite encouraging. They even have one of the partners on staff that specializes in the airports. That's something very important that we need relevant legal advice for. The firm also provides legal services to a couple towns that are right next to us. So I got on the phone and I talked to a couple people. I talked to Mr. Michael Ray Jeffries, who's the chair of the Lunenburg Select Board. And I typed up some notes I shared with other councilors just to get an idea of how are things working with the firm providing legal services for your community. Do you have any concerns? Some of the initial feedback I've gotten about this idea, I asked him about to see what his response was. And so he did say that Mr. Costa is the primary point of contact for the town. He provides, I think, 90-something provided of amount of the services to the town of Lunenburg. And that consistency, I was told by Mr. Jeffries, is very valuable, that you don't have to catch anybody up there. He's always aware of everything going on. But the fact that they have a larger firm behind Mr. Costa is also a great benefit, because if there are times where he's on vacation, there are times that he's unavailable due to illness, there is someone else who can step in and keep the ship going. And he said all of the other attorneys that he's dealt with at the firm have been all of similar high quality. One concern that was raised was, what is response time? If we don't have a local attorney who's here in the community, can we get a hold of them? Can we, if they provide service to other communities, do we have to get in the queue until we can get a response? And Mr. Jeffries said that the services are provided extremely quickly and efficiently. His quote was, feels like we are their only client. He says that emails are typically answered within a day, often within hours. There's more pressing issues. He doesn't hesitate to call Mr. Costa, and his phone calls answered 70% of the time, he estimates. And the remaining calls, when he leaves a message, he gets a call back within a half hour. I mean, that's service. And that's, to be quite honest, that is a level of responsiveness that I never received when we had an in-house solicitor. There are many times where I reached out to contact and never got a response at all. There are other times that would be weeks that would go by. And I'm not the only one. I've talked to members of the planning board where they've reached out repeatedly to get legal opinions on hearings, on permits and things, and they have to keep requesting, and then sometimes they'll get a response, sometimes they just never do. There was an issue with a planning board member that got a job for the city in an unrelated capacity, and eventually we approved them as a special city employee, but they kept asking the solicitor, well, can't she sit on, what happens till the council takes that up? And they never got a response. Months went by, and the solicitor never responded. So they just kind of went what they're doing. They didn't know if it was the legally appropriate thing to do, but they didn't get responsive. That was with an in-house solicitor who was on our payroll. Mr. Jeffries also talked about that Mr. Costa has regular office hours in the town, and it works great to have face-to-face meetings on non-time-sensitive issues for different members of boards or departments to meet and go over things. He's received no complaints from other people in the town, other members of boards, departments about any legal service. Just asked for a general opinion of the quality of legal services they provide, and he used the word outstanding. He says they get clear and straight feedback. They show significant expertise in municipal law. And Mr. Jeffries himself, in his previous careers, worked in legal administration, and he said unsolicited that Mr. Costa is the, quote, best attorney he has ever worked with. And he used the phrase blown away when talking about it. And this is not a positive recommendation. This is an extremely positive recommendation of the firm. And he said, in his quote, he is the highest recommendation for hiring the firm to provide the service. That's a very strong endorsement of the quality of services we can get. Tellerman and Costa also provides legal services for the town of Townsend next door. And so I talked to Eric Slagle, the Townsend town administrator, and asked him about it. And it's a similar situation. Mr. Costa is the primary lawyer, but the other lawyers step in when Mr. Costa is unavailable, which doesn't happen often, but life is life. It does happen. And the other members of the firm have been great to work with. There's no drop in quality of service. In his words, he's very impressed with the services of the firm. Members of the town select board departments are also very happy. He's described it as a very cost-effective way for the town to receive legal services. It's a bit of a different situation being a smaller town versus a city, but he says that there's no way they could get the quality of legal service they get without going through a company like this. He also confirmed that Mr. Costa is impressively timely, is his phrase, in responding to calls and emails regarding correspondence. And I asked him if he would recommend the firm. He said without hesitation that it was a very strong recommendation there. So I think there is incredible need to have strong, good, concise, clear legal services for the city. And it's not something we can necessarily wait for. We have a pending ordinance change that's proposed in regards to solar facilities in the city, which is going to take some legal clarification about what we can and can't do, because there are state laws that regulate this, that we have a pending application. We have to figure some stuff out before we can make determinations, and we need legal guidance. And if we turn this down, what are we going to do? If not this firm, I've raised it to other councils, who else? Who's going to step in and do this? And I just want to go back to some of the concerns that have been raised so far. I think the idea of the city solicitor contract being approved is an impossible catch-22. It is a conundrum that cannot be solved without changing the system. It's not a reason not to do this. It's a reason why something has to be changed to allow this. It's a chicken and egg question. It's not a reason why this is not a good thing to do. It's just the way the ordinance is worded. And we absolutely need to change the city code in how we handle the city solicitor. I think we need to do it whether or not we move forward with this plan or not, because right now the mayor has absolute authority to appoint the solicitor. The check on that, and this is without council approval, the check on that is that there are minimum requirements. It's specified in the ordinance that the solicitor has to attend city council meetings, has to do this, has to do this. But the way this is designed, it gives the mayor unfettered power in appointing the person, but it sets minimum requirements so that the mayor doesn't appoint their drinking buddy who happened to have passed the bar years ago and has a minimum level of work. The solution is really to tailor this to why is this not council approved? Why is it not like any other department head? And why not make it, if it's going to be an issue of a contract or a solicitor, why not make it approval? Why not eliminate some of these specific requirements to have more flexibility and make this a more workable system? Because we absolutely should do this. And I went through and looked at some other communities and how they structure it in their bylaws and city codes and say, okay, well, what do they specify? So my first stop was our sister city next door, Leominster. because they contract legal services, and their city code doesn't seem to reflect that. It's similar to ours in that the mayor shall appoint a city solicitor. It also specifies they have to be a resident of the city, so it just seems like they have something on paper and they don't follow it, so I kind of moved on. I don't know how much help that is. Next, I looked at the city of Watertown. It's a city of similar size, and they use contract legal service. I believe they use KP Law. And they have a city manager in place with a city council. And the city manager, with the approval of the city council, shall appoint the city attorney. And they have a firm, but they still refer to it as the city attorney. They don't specify that it could be a firm, could be attorney. They just put that out there and roll with it. So that's one approach. And that's something we could do here, or we could be a little more nuanced. So I also looked at the town of Burlington. They actually employ Mead, Tellerman, and Costa for their legal services. And in their town bylaws, in the legal department, they specify that the select board shall annually appoint legal counsel for the town. Such legal counsel may be an individual or a firm employing 2 or more attorneys, and shall be there and hereafter called town council. So that puts it more in the legislative body to, well, they don't have a mayor, so that's why the mayor doesn't appoint. But if they have more of a collaborative process of the mayor putting forward a contract and the city council approves, that gets over the contract review conundrum that we have, this catch-22, this impossible situation where we can't correct that. And I want to address a couple other things. Councillor Kuchar mentioned the time worked by the previous solicitor, and he mentioned it was documented. It wasn't. We had a discussion about this when I put forward the proposal at budget time, and the city solicitor made a rough estimate of that he worked 25 hours a week on city business. There's no documentation. There's no substantiation. This was just his estimate off the cuff during a meeting. Any such estimate, you have to wonder how accurate it is. But there's also nothing to substantiate it. We have nothing other than his statement as to how much time he actually worked. So I think another problem or potential problem that has been put forward is just the total cost. And I think it's worthwhile to look at, okay, what are we spending on legal services? What would it cost, to do this on a contract basis? And looking at the numbers, we spend a lot. Going through and finding, because it was raised that there are other expenses scattered through the limits, because they have a nice budgeted item for their contracted services, but are they scattered elsewhere? So I went through and looked, and I talked to a city councilor in Leominster, and a lot of these other expenses are kind of in paper. So city council has a listed legal services of $1,500. That's in there because by the city code, the city council has the ability to get their own individual legal services, which is something that Councilor Zarella has put forward time to time that maybe that'd be a good idea. They never use it. It goes back. It never gets spent. The assessors have a budget of a minor budget of $3,600. That's if they need something, so they don't have to go through any approval process. They, for minor issues, most typically taken from tax takings or things like that. So, I mean, there's whole little things, and if you add up every possible thing that could be associated with legal services, you get to a total amount of $245,000. That's what the city of Leominster spends on their budget. And I talked to the city councilor, and he talked to their comptroller and confirmed the amounts actually spent on KP Law for their contracted services are consistently right about what they budget. He said maybe a couple thousand less, but they know what they have to do, they budget accordingly, they carry out what they have to do, and they get to about that amount. Unless there's special circumstances where there's atypical litigation or something like that, which we have experienced as well as a city, which raises our legal costs. So really, if you do the same thing at Fitchburg and pull out every possible thing that could be, you get, it's way higher. It's $480,000 if you add up every possible thing. Now, a lot of that is, there are costs that would still be there even if we employ Mead, Tellerman, and Costa on an hourly basis. That is true. So a lot of that $480,000 it's a number on paper, but it wouldn't disappear if we go to a contract basis. So really the most comparable expenses, if you just boil down to, and I'm leaving collective bargaining aside because they're not going to handle that, our existing labor council is going to handle that. If you leave out collective bargaining in Leominster, their budgeted amount that goes to their contracted legal providers about $165,000. If you look at just the salaries of our city solicitor, assistant solicitor, factor in the cost of benefits, and the HR director estimated that at 25%, which is consistent with what I've seen. If you add in the administrative support costs that we have been paying to the previous solicitor's firm for their admin and support, if you take that, that comes up to $288,000. So there's a lot of room to play with there. So the question is, what can you get with that? So if you take that money that we're spending on legal salaries, their benefits, and the associated admin support, and you break it down by the hourly rate, you're looking at 1,283 billable hours a year. If you break it down by month, that's 107 billable hours a month. If you want to go by week, that's 25 billable hours a week. That's a lot of time just to stay at the amount we're spending now. Bypassing all those other legal expenses we have, which will probably still be there, this is a lot of time we can afford and not spend any more, and we know every single hour we're paying for, we're getting something for. It's not someone's estimate. We know all of this money we're spending is going directly to time that's being spent on our city in resolving legal issues. Now, I did that. So the proposal right now is to keep the assistant city solicitor. So let's not include that money. If the assistant city solicitors continue to be on salary for now, and I don't know what the long-term plans, if that's to keep or what it is, and they're going to continue to handle enforcement actions in the local district court, and it's just replacing the city solicitor's salary with the associated benefits, with the city solicitor's admin support, we're looking at 74 hours per month or 17 hours per week. This is still a lot of time. This is not, you're shaking your head, Councilor Zarella, but I did all the math.
No, I believe your math. I'm saying that's not a lot of time from an attorney's perspective.
And I can address that too. So one way to look at it the other direction is, if not this firm, who else? We're looking at if we're going to hire a city solicitor for the salary we have approved for the budget, if that same solicitor is working 17 hours a week, which we calculated that this money buys us through the negotiated rate with Meade, Tellerman, and Costa, it's an effective hourly wage of $121. If you look at the previous solicitor's rough estimate of his time spent on city business, which was 25 hours a week, that's an effective hourly wage of $82 an hour. I'm not a lawyer, but I sit with some on the council. I know lawyers. They're generally relatively smart people. They spent a lot of years in school, a lot of years in expensive school. It's a lot of work to pass the bar, and they can do math, and they typically earn much more than that. So you have to look at what are you getting for that money. No sane lawyer is going to volunteer their time and work at such a reduced rate than what they charge actual clients unless they aren't qualified or they're not actually working that much. So we have to look and say, what are we going to be able to get for this money? And that's a significant concern, because I've had issues with the quality of the legal services we got previously. And I think there is room for tremendous improvement by going to a contracted firm that specializes in municipal law. They aren't out doing closings to home sales or doing divorce cases. This is what they do. They do municipal law. This is what their expertise is. And I think we have the potential to get better quality legal services than trying to see who we can get to work for this amount, to do this level of work for the salary. Because it's more than just the salary. We also have to pay benefits. And we also have to contribute to the pensions. And pensions are a long-term cost. And are an enormous weight around the neck of the city budgets. We are spending an enormous amount of just trying to catch up on our underfunded pension liabilities. So I think there is concern, okay, can we afford enough time? I think we also have to look at how we're using legal services. Do we need everything we're doing? Are we using them most efficiently? It was brought up the example of Mr. Costa attending the meeting tonight or the meeting on Tuesday to say 7 words. Well, does he have to be here? Does the city council, the city solicitor, have to be at every meeting? That's a good question. And maybe we do. Unexpectedly, things come up, and we have legal questions, and that's helpful. So does he have to be here in person? If he might just be there just in case and say 7 words, is it possible to have him attend on Zoom? We have counselors who do that regularly. He doesn't have to travel. He just has to sit and try to pay attention to our riveting meetings. You can't help but hang on every word. So there are different ways we can look at it. If there's a concern about attending meetings, do they have to come in person? If there's a big legal contentious issue that's on tap, sure, absolutely. It's worthwhile to bring them in. If it's just a standard meeting where there might be a 2-second question about was this form checked or, is this requirement met, could he do it over Zoom? Could we send an email before the meeting and resolve it and have it? Absolutely. So there are ways, if we're concerned about total cost, there are ways to effectively manage that and just be smart in how we do things. Because I think we already have a tremendously large legal budget, and we can spend that a lot wiser. We could potentially spend less. We can also potentially get much better legal service and much more comprehensive legal service. And I think that's something worthwhile doing. So I think this is something that we should do. I think this is something that we need to look at. I think we need to look at the code, and I think we should make changes. But I do want to bring it back to the way the code is written now. The city solicitor and the legal services are the mayor's prerogative. If we want to change that, then we should change that. If we want to make it subject to council approval, then we should do that. But if we are going to deny it because we're not going to let the mayor move money that we already approved to be spent to a different bucket, that's obstructing the mayor's right to carry out what the mayor's right that is given to them in the code to control our legal services. That's finding loopholes and nitpicking to prevent the mayor from doing what the code says they are allowed to do. If we want to change that, I'm for that. We can have that conversation and find a good system to do it. But if we want to prevent this from happening because we don't want to allow money that we've already approved to spend not to be spent on the lawyer, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's finding a loophole to just prevent it for the sake of preventing it, rather than making it the best system possible to make sure the city gets the best legal representation as possible. Now, I do apologize. I've talked for a long time. I've tried to address a couple points. I will hand the floor over so someone else can speak.
Thank you very much. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. President. With all due deference to Councilor Van Hazinga, I don't think that this is an attempt to obstruct the mayor's ability to appoint a city solicitor. I think what it's requiring is that the mayor's office, as well as all of the city councilors, follow what's in the current ordinance. That has not been done. And this was done in such a way that there was a lack of transparency with regard to when the contract was signed. I believe that Mr. Pusateri was still the city solicitor up until January 24th. And therefore, this should have been signed off. So I have a problem with the contract, the validity of the contract, and that's not a minor matter. So I have a problem with that, but I think that's curable. I don't think that's going to stop everything. I do have a couple of questions. First of all, there was a comment that the previous city solicitor failed to keep track of whatever time he spent doing city work. I did practice as an attorney. I don't anymore. But when I was in private practice, if I charged a flat fee, I did not keep track of how much time I spent on that case.
That's true.
If I charged $10,000, I got paid $10,000, whether I worked 2 hours or whether I worked 500 hours. And I believe that is what city solicitor did as well. The city solicitor was being paid a flat fee. That city solicitor was required to work as many hours as it took to address the issues of the city. Whether he did so or not is up to personal opinion. And I'm not going to comment on that. I do have a question whether we're paying the city solicitor on an hourly basis, and yet we're leaving the assistant city solicitor by salary. So that makes no sense to me whatsoever. If we're going to do it for one, we should do it for both. But that's going to require a change in the ordinance. And I think that is something that the mayor's office should have looked at before they signed this contract. I think that those are issues that they should have realized. And I realize new administration, you get a buy for a little bit, but reading the ordinances I mean, anybody can read an ordinance. And I think that should have been done. There was a comment made earlier that if you contact the city solicitor not during work hours, it's going to cost you more. It costs you the same amount whether you contact them at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock in the morning. The fee is the fee is the fee. I do have a question with regard to, and I don't have any problem with this firm whatsoever. I think that they're competent. I think that they know what they're doing. But my problem is that they also represent Lunenburg and Townsend. And if they are representing Lunenburg, Townsend, and Fitchburg, and a conflict arises between Fitchburg and Lunenburg or Fitchburg and Townsend, we're now paying somebody else to come in and handle that. So that's an issue that I have. The ordinance requires that the city solicitor be present. And I believe that it says in the answer to the questions that were posed by Councilor Cragen, Lisa and her partner, Adam Costa, will be available to attend council meetings as needed and required by the council president. The presumption is that they will be here unless the council president says that they are not needed, not the other way around. So those are my concerns. I am concerned that we have an amount in the budget that's known, the salary, and it's called a salary. It's not a per hour amount. So there's an amount in the budget that's known, and whether that amount could be less, paying someone per hour, or more, we don't know. If there was some consideration of looking at this on a trial basis and seeing where that goes, I would not be opposed to that with the requisite changes in the ordinances. So I yield the floor.
Thank you. Councilor Kuchar, also Attorney Kuchar.
Also Attorney Kuchar, thank you. First thing I want to clear up, with all due respect to Councilor Van Hazinga, former City Solicitor Pusateri did not serve 10 years, so he would not be eligible for a pension. So that's number one. Number two, I want to agree with the sentiments of my colleague, both legally and city council-wise, in regards to the flat fee statement. City Solicitor Pusateri was getting paid a salary. That salary would change depending on budgets and whatnot, but that would be as a flat fee. So he wouldn't have to keep time when you deal with a flat fee. So that is 100% accurate. I do a lot of flat fees in my practice, and, we don't keep time on that. In addition to that, I understand if Councilor Van Hazinga was not satisfied with City Solicitor Pusateri's representation of the city, but I never had a problem getting a call back or getting a call returned. In fact, 90% of the time, whenever I called him, he'd pick up almost immediately. So I don't agree with the sentiments from my colleague. So in addition to that, it was stated that it was an estimate of 25 to 30 hours a week that former City Solicitor Pusateri would work. And that would equate to, that's $6,750 a month. Well, a week. That's $351,000 a year. So that's a big chunk of change to switch. In addition to that, I did want to just make the comment that as it stands right now, we're in violation of our charter as having them as the city solicitor. The contract wasn't approved. It needs to be an actual person, not a firm. But I agree with the sentiments of Councilor Van Hazinga. If we want to do it this way, we have to change the charter. That's it. We have to change the structure of our legal department. As it stands right now, it's not a valid firm. Not the firm, but it's not a valid contract, and it's not in accordance with the current law of Fitchburg. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Van Hazinga.
Thank you. So I think on that last point, we are violating the charter. We're also violating the charter in many other places. There is a lot that needs to be cleaned up in our city code in relation to how we actually do business. This is not the only item. Just comes to mind looking at the requirement that the city solicitor attend council meetings, legislative fair meetings, and there was another committee. What was it?
Claims committee.
Claims
We
committee.
don't have one.
We don't even have a claims committee.
We're not required to. It's just if we had one, it'd be required to
But there
attend.
are no, if you look through the code, there's no shortages of spaces you can identify that are inconsistent with how we actually do business and how we run. And I know Councilor Zarella has pointed out, we need to do a bigger cleanup of our code. We did a big cleanup of the zoning ordinance a couple of years ago to try to clean it up to make it consistent with how we actually do business. And we're still missing stuff and finding other things that we need to change. It's the same thing with the code. There's, as much as it seeks to set the laws in stone, it is a living document. Times change, circumstances change. That shouldn't be a reason why we can't ensure that the city gets the most effective legal services possible. Another point that Mr. Kuchar raised was, he's absolutely right that our previous city solicitor did not work long enough to qualify for a pension. I don't know how many exactly years was he.
I think it's 10 years, isn't it?
Yeah, how many years he served as solicitor? It was six years.
6 years, yeah.
He's not forbidden from coming back and serving as a city solicitor again, or working for the city in other property. And in fact, one of our recent city solicitors, Mr. Ciota, I believe he was city solicitor for like 17 years in 2 stints. And don't quote me, but it is a substantial number, and he qualified for a pension. So that is a long-term cost that the city potentially has to pay. And lastly, I do want to mention something Councilor Walsh said about openness of maybe looking at this on a trial basis, is that we're into February. There's less than half the fiscal year left. We have 5 months till the budget in June. So this is an opportunity to do a trial run, to see what the actual costs are, to work out the system, to see, is this going to work? Can we tailor the agreement with Meade, Tallerman, and Costa and what we need and have it be fiscally manageable and fit into our budget? If we can do that, we can go forward. But this is 5 months. Can we do a trial? If we're going to do a trial, this is the way to do it. And then, you know what? If it doesn't work, we can make a change for the new fiscal year in July. We have that opportunity. And this is something that the mayor put forward. And honestly, she's the one that's going to have to make it work. So if she can't make it work for the money we're spending, it's not going to work. The onus is on her. This was her decision to do this. Personally, I agree with the decision, but the onus is on her to prove that this is a workable solution. And if it's not, we really should. So if it turns out this does not work when we're doing the budget in July, you know what? We should change path and not do it. But we should see, because we aren't the only community that is looking to or to be served by a firm rather than a specific solicitor. There are many, many communities in our Commonwealth who do that. Some are communities our size, some are larger, some are smaller. I think it's worth it to give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, I'll join in and agree we should go back to hiring and find a city solicitor and hire them on salary. But I think we should give this an opportunity to work.
Thank you. Councillor Cragen hasn't spoken yet, so I'll go to her first.
Thank you. I think I was the first one to jump in to just, put together a whole list of questions as regards what this would mean, because I am one of the two here who's not an attorney. So, but I have spent many years doing municipal work, 14 years on the school committee, and I completely identify with the city charter because the school policy book is approximately 9 or 10 pounds, at least. A 3-ring binder, and it doesn't go so far as to refer to one-room schoolhouses, but there are items in there that predate, chapter 2.5. Anyway, Prop 2.5. And so my feelings, my thoughts, and my ruminations lead me to the same area where Councillor Van Hazinga seems to be moving. I do not think this was handled well. I do not think it was helpful for Mr. Vera and Mr. Phillips Wilcox to be on their own 2 Tuesdays ago at our council meeting. This is something the mayor needs to speak to us about. This is something the mayor needs to sit in the mayor's chair and be present for all of these kinds of deliberations, because this is part of the process. It is the history of Fitchburg to have a new mayor and have a new city solicitor. That goes back to the beginning. And it is interesting to reflect on how many we've had in the 21st century alone. And they have been local people, and they have been people whose offices are within walking distance of the City Hall and other buildings. However, I was asked after I'd shared the questions with my husband, and then we got the answers back, and I shared those with him as well. And we talked about it, and I said, I'm sure there are other questions that, were I an attorney, I would have known to ask, but this seemed pretty basic, everything from, how does the, apportioning out the timepiece in terms of the council, as well as literally where are the files going to be kept. And the overall costs. The rule is, the mayor has a lot of power in our form of government, period. And we have authority and we have influence, and it seems to me that this is a good learning experience, I think, especially for, any new mayor. I remember previous mayors coming in and their decision, and I think attorneys are more sanguine than we think they are, because it's business. It's a job. It's what it is. I did have the chance to speak to Mr. Costa at the MMA event, which was, very helpful to kind of, get that sense of things. And I spoke to people in Lunenburg as well who expressed great satisfaction. However, Lunenburg is not the kingdom of Fitchburg, which has its own rules, laws, and I did say we operate by a different physics in the universe sometimes. So you can't count on that. I was glad to see, different attorney for the airport. The airport is a really exciting place in Fitchburg right now. There is a lot of activity happening, a lot of activity planned. Having, stellar representation while this development goes on is important. It's important to that success. So my piece is I'm really glad to hear from all of you for whom it is your field and your life's calling. But at the end of the day, not to vote against transferring that. It seems to me churlish, which is a nice Shakespearean word, and inappropriate. but I would have preferred a lot more transparency, and we need the mayor at our city council meetings. And I'm going to leave it at that and yield the floor.
Councillor Walsh?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just had one other comment that I neglected to make before. I think one of the issues is that this firm, no matter how much they know about municipal law, they don't know about Fitchburg. And so we are paying them on an hourly basis to get to know Fitchburg. And that's bothersome to me. But again, I am willing to, if we take steps to modify the city code, I would defer to that. I did just want to state at the beginning of the discussion, I went over and asked Councilor Zarella a question, and my question was, I wanted to know, Ms. Wetchy had been speaking. I wanted to know if, when Councilor Zarella interrupted her, she had exhausted her time. And Councilor Zarella confirmed that yes, that time was exhausted. No, so I just wanted to say that.
Watch it on FATV, you'll see.
If you speak out again, you'll be asked to leave. All right, so I have a few points to make here. First, I just want to address the question of the mayor's prerogatives versus the council's authority. The mayor has, under our current charter and ordinance, essentially unreviewable authority to appoint a city solicitor. The mayor does not have authority, at least not in such a clear and unambiguous sense, to contract with or to contract for legal services. Those are two separate questions. The question of who occupies the office and the question of what transactional arrangement we enter into as a city are two completely separate questions. I would say that if we're speaking to the spirit of the law, as opposed to finding loopholes, I would note that Chapter 3-57, which is engagement of special counsel, indicates a clear intent on the part of whichever council originally passed it, that when contracting for legal services, that should be reviewed by council. Now, whether contracting for the job of city solicitor counts as engaging special counsel in this sense is an issue I would have to research before I opined on it, but certainly the spirit of this provision indicates that the council back then, it appears 2014, wished to have control over any contractual relationship we enter into with a law firm, or at least approve the necessity of doing so. Yes, we do need to clean up our city code quite a bit. I've been on that since I got on the council. But I think there's a large difference between realizing that we have been inadvertently out of compliance with our ordinances in some respect and deciding to knowingly and intentionally derogate from the ordinance as written. Frankly, and with no aspersions intended towards my colleague whatsoever, but for my part, I would feel it to be a violation of my oath to vote in favor of something that I knew was contrary to the ordinances as written. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going through a list of notes I made here. Yes, we could have a provision that simply says that the council reviews any contract that we enter into. But the fact is, the fact that we have 3 attorneys on the council at the moment is coincidence. It's a contingent fact, not a necessary one. There have been years when there are no attorneys on the council. And when there are no attorneys on the council simply isn't qualified to analyze a contract and see whether it will hold up in court, whether it exposes us to liability, whether it does what we intend it to do. We can certainly look at it. We are more than qualified as political elected officials to look at a contract and say, does this appear to do the things that we think the city should be doing? That's within our purview. But then asking, does it have the legal effect? I mean, quite frankly, there's a reason that Councillor Kuchar and myself and Councillor Walsh and Attorney Costa get paid. It's because, it's just like I can't wire my house. I have no credentials as an electrician. Doesn't mean I'm dumb, doesn't mean I'm ignorant. It means I've never studied as an electrician. Someone who has not studied law simply does not have the capacity to review a dense contract with lots of legalese and say, yep, this is A-okay. If it were a contract in an area of law I wasn't familiar with, I wouldn't even do it. And I am an attorney because, that's not my area of expertise. And then the other point about, do we need the city solicitor at every meeting? Especially where, quite frankly, I would be the one who would have to make that call, at least this year. I don't want to. With any other department head, remember, the city solicitor is not just a position. The city solicitor is the head of the legal department. We happen to have only 2 people in it, but still it is a department of City Hall. If the council wants to have Nick Erickson come in front of us to explain something to us about the DPW, we don't have to consider, hey, this is going to cost the city money. Do we really need him in here? He's on salary. He comes in and he tells us what he needs to tell us. I honestly, given if we have something like, whether it's Ethier Street, whether it's, an easement issue or a taking or even just something really simple like an ordinance change that we just want to make sure is kosher, I don't really want to have to be thinking, can I really justify spending $700 of the city's money on this? I want to just say, yeah, the council could use the input of the solicitor.
Yep.
Let's make sure the solicitor's there. Just like I would with any other department head in the city. In fact, the council has, by charter, the right to require any department head to appear before us. Then, the question of, if we don't go with this, who else do we get? All I can say is it doesn't appear to have ever been a problem before. It's true. The amount of work that the city solicitor does, if broken down into an hourly rate, is well below what any of us make in private practice. On the other hand, it's a guaranteed salary. You don't have to go out, look for clients, manage those client relationships and so forth. But for whatever reason, I don't know why. I don't know all our past city solicitors. For whatever reason, there seems to have always been someone willing to do it. Every past mayor has been able to, and I am confident that this mayor is able to, find someone within the local community who could do this job. I don't like that this was presented to the council as essentially a done deal, and that now we are in the position of having to say, well, are we going to pull the rug out or not? As opposed to, this is what we would like to do. Is council on board? But if it comes right down to it, I don't want to, but I'll pull the rug because I don't think this is the right move for the city. I have some other questions and concerns that I'd like to make sure to raise. One is the position of assistant city solicitor, So right at the moment, we have Donna Pollock. The thing is, Chapter 3, Section 58 says that the solicitor appoints the assistant, and the assistant performs work as directed by the city solicitor. So, Attorney Costa, I just want to confirm, is Mead, Tellerman, and Costa, or Lisa Mead specifically, intending to take on the role of a supervising attorney over Donna Pollock? Because everything I've been hearing is basically she's going to have her purview and you guys will have yours, and, you guys won't really handle her stuff. But the way the ordinance is worded, it certainly appears that it makes the city solicitor the supervisor of the assistant city solicitor.
So I've reviewed that language in the ordinance, and I don't know that I necessarily concur that it requires the solicitor to be in a supervisory role. And my understanding is that that's not how it's historically functioned, but you would certainly know better than I would. I do understand that there has been frequent historic communication in recent years anyway between former solicitor Pusateri and Attorney Pollock. They have consulted each other with respect to pending cases. To that end, I've met with Attorney Pollock and I've reviewed her caseload. We've had discussions about the substance of those cases so that I could familiarize myself with those. I've spoken to Attorney Mead about those as well, with the intention of us gathering an understanding as to what cases are presently pending before the courts, mostly housing court, a few district court cases as well. So the idea is that there would be a role, a relationship for sure. Supervisory might not be how I describe it, certainly. Attorney Pollock is quite experienced at what she does, and the discussion that was had with the mayor's office was that it made both practical sense and for the sake of efficiency to have her continue on performing those roles. She's local to the housing court, she's in housing court with great frequency, and she has familiarity with all the players on those sorts of matters, and there are many
certainly. And I have no problem with Attorney Pollock remaining in this role if that's what the mayor wishes. It's just the way I see it here is because the appointment is actually made by the city solicitor, it means that if, and again, I don't anticipate this with this particular individual, but in terms of structurally speaking, if there were a problem with the assistant city solicitor, it would be the city solicitor in the hot seat for that decision to appoint that person. And I'm not sure that's really possible without a more direct, closer relationship. As I understand it, there were, now I don't know this for a fact, but as to the best of my understanding, the way it had always worked for the past several years was that there were certain matters that were sort of assigned to Attorney Pollock by default, but that Attorney Pusateri still had sort of eyes on everything that was happening and and I know for a fact that he would occasionally take some of those code enforcement or zoning cases or whatever on himself because he knew it would be a larger issue that might eat up too much of Attorney Pollock's workload or whatever. So that's just a concern that I have. But I did some quick math, and again, coming back to the travel provision and the attendance at council meetings. We have approximately 22 council meetings a year and an average of 5 legislative affairs meetings. Now, it's true that historically we haven't required the presence of the city solicitor at every council meeting, but I would estimate that it's maybe 5 a year or so that, that he would contact me and say, hey, looks like your agenda is a 10-minute thing. Do I need to be there? And I'd say, no. So it really comes out to 22 either way, because then you add back in the legislative affairs, and I can't imagine having a legislative affairs meeting where we wouldn't want to have the solicitor on hand just because of the nature of the committee. Doing that out and assuming that each meeting lasts an average of 1 hour, obviously we have some that go much longer, some that are really quick, but an average of an hour. That means that on an annual basis, the cost of having the city solicitor at our meetings would be nearly $15,000 for that alone, not counting zoning board meetings where I know the solicitor has frequently needed to be in attendance for various matters.
Just as clarification, Mr. President, you said in regards to travel, is that just in regards to travel?
Travel and an estimate of 1 hour sitting in the seat.
Okay.
So that's an estimated 3 billable hours per meeting. So then there's, zoning, I know frequently requested the presence of the city solicitor. And I imagine there are other boards and commissions that would need it. Any committee of the council has the privilege of requesting the solicitor's presence. Usually it's not required, but there have been, I would say it's not rare. It's not every time, but it's hardly an unheard of, thing for there to be something in front of finance or city property. City property, I know in particular, very frequently requires some legal input into, hey, this is what the property is, this is what we're doing with it, here's the breakdown on the deed. That's, again, not something that we can really have a legal layperson responsible for. So that's already seeming like a decent chunk of roughly more than 10% of our current salary paid, not total cost, but the salary paid to the city solicitor under our current ordinance. More than 10% of that would be eaten up just by the cost of attendance at meetings. Additionally, comparing Leominster and assuming, without deciding, so to speak, that their budgeted numbers are tolerably close to their actuals, they come in approximately $75,000 lower than we do. However, I also have somewhere around here in my piles of papers, I was just looking up to see if I could see their contract with KP Law. I didn't find it, but I did find an article in the Sentinel from 2017 where the City Council of Leominster was deliberating on whether to change their council rule to allow individual councilors to contact the city solicitor without permission from the whole council. That's neither here nor there. The point is, in doing so, they were very much talking about it as a rationed service, as something that shouldn't be overused, as something that, we should really think about it before we go to the legal department on this, on a given thing. That's something we've never had to do, and it's not something that I'm particularly eager to have to do, because I can't, obviously, for the reasons already ably outlined by my two fellow attorneys on the committee, I can't conclusively verify how much time Solicitor Bruce Terry spent on city business in a given week. I can verify that as one person in the city utilizing his services, I alone frequently spent 1 to 2 hours average per week in consultation with him on various things. And in weeks where the council had something particularly significant before us, that could go as high as 4 or 6 hours. That's just me. I'm one person out of the probably several dozen who are entitled by ordinance to make free use of the city solicitor's opinions. We are not, Leominster does not have a similar provision. We have a provision that says that the city solicitor is required to render an opinion at the request of any of a whole laundry list of city officials, only a few of which are under the direct control of the mayor and could therefore, of course, be rationed by the mayor. The rest are not. City councilors, members of boards and commissions, they aren't required to take instruction from the mayor on when and whether to contact the city solicitor. And so I see no way of ensuring cost containment. if we're paying on an hourly rate. I'm certainly not going to restrain myself from, contacting the legal department on any matter that I think would benefit from the opinion of the legal department. That's how I do the business of the city, the business I was elected to do. And I've found it indispensable over the last 6 years. I can't imagine that my colleague in the audience is going to be satisfied with not being able to ask questions of the city solicitor without thinking about the cost of it beforehand. And it's not about being able to call the solicitor at 11 at night, though I have done so on a few occasions. It's about being able to call the solicitor even during working hours without having to think, okay, if I'm on the phone for X number of time, that costs the city X number of dollars. Can I justify that? I'm thinking about an ordinance I'd like to put together. I'd like to bounce it off the solicitor before I put pen to paper. Can I justify spending $150 of the city's money on that? That's not a call that any of us should have to make. We shouldn't have to choose between being good stewards of the public fund and doing what we feel is going to best advance the goals and priorities of our constituents. And then, as Councillor Walsh mentioned, I do have concerns, and I would invite any response from Attorney Costa if you'd like, on what happens in the event of a conflict between municipalities represented by Meade, Tellerman, and Costa. Have you had that come up before?
So we have. I will tell you it doesn't come up with much frequency. We represent approximately 36 communities across the state. They range in size. We represent one community in Western Massachusetts with 500 residents. Mm-hmm. We represent towns with 10,000 residents and others with 40,000 residents, and we represent cities. So there have been a few occasions where we've represented neighboring communities, and there's been, for example, the need to negotiate an intermunicipal agreement. There are provisions in the law in circumstances like that where the parties can each sign a disclosure and agree based upon the nature of the contractual relationship that they're comfortable being represented by the same council. And we've had that happen with IMAs, for example. But in other instances that we have to engage outside counsel on behalf of one of the communities and typically on behalf of both of the communities because we'll step away entirely. I know it happens more frequently for other firms. I've heard some references to a few other firms in Massachusetts. I won't use the names, but that represent, there's one that represents over 100 communities across the state. So they may represent 6 or 7 or 8 communities that border one another, and they find themselves in that situation with some frequency. And so I had a case maybe 4 or 5 years ago where a community in Middlesex County had an issue. We were conflicted out. It actually wasn't a circumstance of a neighboring community, but it was just a situation where years prior, the applicant had been represented by a partner of mine, and so we enlisted special counsel. We worked to deal with them to work for the same hourly rate that we were working for, so it wasn't any increased cost to the community. Mm-hmm. And they stepped in and handled the matter, and then they stepped away when the matter was concluded.
Okay, so, that's an eminently sensible procedure. I have no objection on principle. My problem with that is that, and again, this is no fault of your firm, it's what I expect from contract legal services. We're already going to be working with a firm that has no roots in Fitchburg, has no personal familiarity with the city and its issues. I'm sure that would develop over time, but at the moment, at least, there isn't any. And the issue that I have with that is that then, if we do wind up in a situation like that, we'd have to bring in outside counsel who knows even less about what's actually going on, get them up to speed. And that just doesn't seem to be in our best interest compared to, I'll give an example. We've had, this is not even in a conflict situation, this is just in general, the value of local knowledge. We've had issues come before the council before where many of us were going back and forth on the bench trying to decide, we're looking at it for a particular property. Oh, it's the one over such and such. No, I think it's the one over there. And Attorney Bruce Terry knew exactly where it was because, he knows the area. He's been there. He's worked with the property for quite some time. That's not a deficiency in the firm or anything. That's natural for a firm coming in from outside, but it's still something that affects what we get out of it, as opposed to a local attorney who not only knows the area and the community, knows all the local attorneys for that matter, knows the history of various issues that have gone on in the community, many of which will not necessarily be apparent in legal files because they either didn't result in cases or they, are very old or something like that. But also I've noticed, this is something I only just noticed as I was thinking about this issue a week or so ago. Of all of our former city solicitors who are still living in the area, which is almost all of them who are still alive, almost all of them have remained involved in the community and in the government and are consulted informally by various departments and so forth. They sometimes render sort of off-the-books services when there's a small matter that just needs their particular expertise for an opinion. That's something that can only be had with a local attorney. It's just something that you couldn't possibly expect from a firm that's headquartered an hour away. If we bring them on, when and if we're done with them, they're done with us, which is entirely proper for a contractual legal relationship. I know, if I've got a client who hires me for something, when they're done with me, I'm not going to necessarily keep following up with them unless they're a personal friend of mine. If they need me again, they'll contact me. But, it's different when you've got someone who's entrenched in the community who, for lack of a better term, cares about the city as more than a, contractual relationship. And again, I'm going to say this over and over again just because I want to make sure no one gets the wrong idea. That is not a criticism of this firm or any other firm. That is exactly what is expected from a contractual relationship. That is a business dealing. You care about your client to the extent that you have a professional duty to them, but you aren't necessarily invested in their outcomes. In fact, usually for attorneys, if you get too invested in your client's outcomes, you're going to drive yourself crazy. But it's different when it's your own city. It's different. And so two more points I want to make before I yield the floor to my colleague. And I know that Mr. Vera seems to want to make some follow-up comments, and that'll be fine too. So I recall from the responses to Councillor Cragen's questions in writing that the city files would be held at a firm headquarters, one or another. How is that going to impact our ability as a city to access them at need, whether because the case is no longer pending or something, it has perhaps become a public record, or whether it's simply a councillor or a department head, or the mayor for that matter, who just wants to privately look into something without necessarily having to, go and request the file and get it sent over or whatever. Right now, all our files live here. They're either on our servers in the basement of City Hall, or at worst, 2 streets over at Pusateri and Wilson, if Vinny had happened to take something with him to work on. That's a concern of mine, is that we're unlike a typical, private client. Most of my private clients, I would hope that they have no particular interest in, scrutinizing their own files on a regular basis, because they're just going to get the wrong idea about things. But a governmental client, we may need to get a look in on some things that that normally could just live at the law office. So how, if I wanted to get a paper file from something, how long would it take to get it to me?
So if I could, let me try and address this a few different ways. So we don't have a strong preference as to how we maintain client files. We have some municipal clientele, and of course that is our bread and butter. We work with municipalities. So we appreciate that every municipality is different, and some have preferences to have all files maintained on site in city or town hall or municipal offices, and others prefer that we maintain the files. We have to pay for space to maintain paper files, so we'd much prefer that it stay on file with the city or town. But many would prefer that that not be the case, and that we maintain particularly litigation files, closed files, that we keep them until such time as in the future, if there is different counsel appointed by a city council or by a select board, we would transition those files. When I had my meeting with Attorney Pusateri a couple of weeks ago, he had prepared multiple boxes for me. I think there were maybe 16 boxes of cases that he had at his office. He indicated there were plenty of others on file with the city. Those are probably mostly closed files. We would certainly be happy to return closed files to the city if you'd prefer to keep them on site. With respect to open files, if they're litigation files, we need ready access to them, so they'd be in our offices. And our offices are not in Fitchburg. They're not 2 blocks away, as is Attorney Pusateri's office, so I can't really give you a satisfactory answer to that. But if they're active litigation files, we would have those physical files in one of our offices. Again, when they're closed, they could be returned to you. What I found these days, particularly even in the post-COVID world, the past 3.5 years, is, as you can all appreciate, or many of you can appreciate as attorneys, all filing now is done online. New cases are initiated online. All filings are made through the e-file system. So virtually everything we have is electronic, and I copy clients, municipal clients, appropriate department heads, or the mayor, or the select board or town manager on those filings, and so they have the electronic copies. So these days it's very easy to obtain electronic copies. We obviously can scan anything on short notice if there were need to gain access to it. And then there's an expectation, and I appreciate that our office is not 5 minutes or 15 minutes away. We have an expectation in any community where we become council, especially a community of Fitchburg size, that we're going to have a physical presence with some regularity. I'm here today. I was here 2 nights ago. I was here on Monday meeting with Attorney Pollack. I was here last week meeting with Attorney Pusateri. So we have an expectation that we're going to spend time in the community. And so to the extent that there was a document you needed a physical file, and you needed it by the end of the week, there's a good chance I'm going to be here between Monday and Friday, if not once, then maybe twice, maybe 3 times.
Okay.
So that's what we found with our municipal clientele. But as I said, every client's a bit different, and some say, please keep the files, and others say we'd prefer to have them on site.
Right, and I'm not trying to, grill you or trap you or trick you or anything. I'm just looking to flesh these things out, and, sometimes it's exactly the answer I expect. Sometimes it's an answer I didn't think of. And so, the last thing is, and again, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this so that it comes across as the issue I'm trying to present and not as a criticism I'm not trying to make. But when we had that Ethier Street acceptance 2 nights ago, what had typically happened in the past when something like that would come up, something that heavily involved the city legal department, is Solicitor Pusateri would basically present the entire issue to us. Here's what we're trying to do, here's how it got started, here's the history of the parcel, here's, the issues surrounding it, here's the next steps, and so on. And again, you just came in, I don't fault you at all, but the only thing you kind of had to say about it was the paperwork is in order, which is good, but I think that's what I meant earlier in the meeting when I said we're looking for a legal department, not just legal services, not just document review and official written opinions and so forth, but actually being enmeshed with the business of the city to the point where it's not just, a file that got sent over, but, oh, this is the Ethier Street project that's been going on for, 6 months or 2 years or whatever, and here's what the city's trying to do with it. And, the sort of less a vendor of legal services where we reach out when we have a particular legal need, and more, like I said, someone who's involved in the city to a degree where even a process where a legal issue hasn't necessarily come up yet, there's still knowledge of what the city's engaged in, what our plans are, what our proposals are, so that when these issues come up, it's kind of more holistic. There's a knowledge of how it interacts with other matters in the city that may not yet have any, strictly legal valence to them, and so on. And I guess I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. I'd welcome any comments on that.
If I could, and I guess I'd just like to sort of preface this by saying I haven't asked to speak or interrupted throughout the committee meeting because I'm not really sure it's my role to be arguing policy or debating or taking a strong position that or fighting for a position or a job that I'm serving in today. But I understand there's a contractual component too as well. So I've stayed quiet, and I'm certainly happy to do that. But where that's a specific critique concerning something that happened a couple of nights ago, I would like to address it.
Certainly.
So I did have an opportunity to review the paperwork only because I received from Ms. Bellotta a copy of the package of information together with the agenda a couple of days prior to your meeting on Tuesday evening. So I reviewed the materials, so I was familiar with what might come up during the meeting, and I did look specifically at that paperwork because I knew there may be some questions that's obviously of a legal nature. I had not received any sort of transition of that case from former city solicitor. I did not have a file on that case from former city solicitor unless it's in one of the many, many boxes, which I have not made my way through for the past week and a half. So that's all I knew about the matter. That is not, I will tell you, that is not typically the way that we approach legal services, because what we've found in the communities where we have, where municipalities have transitioned to us from other firms, is a common complaint is we use outside counsel, they swoop in, they swoop out, they're not a member of the community, they don't know enough about our community, we feel like they don't really care that much about our community. We see a different face every time we ask for counsel to attend a meeting. That's not been our approach. It's why we've gained, I think, the popularity we've gained over the past 7 or 8 or 9 years since that we've been doing this in our current iteration as a firm. So just to give you an example, and it relates to what was on your agenda a couple of nights ago, I'm before the select board in Lunenburg on Tuesday evening, and they're addressing a number of permanent and temporary takings of land, portions of roadway for the purpose of a bridge replacement project. I've been a part of that from the very start. I reviewed the plan when it was prepared, 2 different versions of the plan. I prepared the paperwork. I prepared the order of taking, as well as the select board vote, which I circulated earlier this week to the town manager. I will be in attendance next week at that meeting to present it to the board. So that would usually be the way that we would handle something of that sort. Again, in this case, the case hadn't been transitioned. I just happened to be at the meeting on Tuesday because it was a council meeting. I was obligated to attend, and so I reviewed the materials in advance so I could at least speak to them and tell you that they were legally in order. But I'll be candid, I don't have any background familiarity with that particular project. I couldn't have said any more than that on Tuesday.
Of course, and that's what I said when I was saying I want to make sure that it comes across the way I intend, and it was certainly not intended as a complaint about your provision of legal services. I just wanted to get your thoughts on, like, what we can expect. Because, believe me, I understand. I don't expect you to be 100% up to speed on cases that you've just gotten to look at. That wasn't my point at all. It was not a dissatisfaction with your provision of services, but it was it highlighted an issue for me that I wanted to raise.
Motion to move the question.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
So moved.
I have a motion and second to move the question. This requires a 2/3 vote. Because it is late at night and I am probably going to get alphabetical order wrong if I attempt it, I'm just going to go left to right. Councillor Kuchar.
Yes.
Councillor Van Hazinga.
No.
I'll say no. Councillor Walsh.
I'm not sure what,
Move the question,
Oh, yes,
basically
yes.
terminate debate.
yes, move the question.
Councillor Craven?
Yes.
All right, that is
60%.
right, so not quite 2/3. So I believe next I had Councillor Van Hazinga.
Thank you. I'd like to share some thoughts on a couple issues that are brought up, and one of them a while back was the idea of are we going to have to ration legal services? And I think that's a legitimate concern, that we need to make sure that with the funds we have available, we're able to get sufficient legal services under this type of agreement versus employing a city solicitor in-house. But I do think that regardless of whether or not we have a contracted legal agency or an in-house solicitor, we absolutely should stop and think before we ask, is this a question that's worth asking? Is this something I can figure out myself? Is it valuable to the business at hand? And that's something we should always ask before we involve other people and involve city resources, because even with an in-house solicitor, if we're asking them the questions, they're spending time on this and they're not able to spend time on other issues and other problems that need to be solved. So I think regardless of our arrangement, we should always stop and think, is this a question that has to go to the solicitor? Is this warranted? Is this something I can figure out on my own? Do I have to do this? Do I have to use these resources? And it's not just on legal issues, on contacting any departments. We should always do this. I always stop and think before I contact the DPW commissioners or the superintendent of the streets, is this an issue I can handle myself? Can I just log a ticket and be done? Do I have the breadth of knowledge to be able to explain or resolve an issue with the constituent myself? My first thought is not always to pick up the phone or to write an email. It's to see what has to be done. Can I solve it myself? Is it worthwhile? Because all our department heads, all our city resources are in high demand. They have a lot to do, and we have to do a lot with what we have. So we absolutely should always stop and take a check and ration our resources to make sure we're using them wisely. And to this idea that we have someone on staff so we have unfettered access to ask them whatever we want, how often, that's the wrong way to approach things, because we always will have limited resources. Whether it's a budget for a contracted firm to provide legal services, whether it's just the time of a city solicitor. And I think one of my complaints with the legal service we would be getting on the solicitor doesn't necessarily have to do with the solicitor themselves, but they're one person doing a part-time job that they only have so many hours that they can devote to this. They cannot resolve every issue immediately that comes before them because they're one person doing a part-time job. The solicitor had his own practice that he also had to run. There's other concerns, and this isn't their sole focus. And I think that's one of the problems with that kind of arrangement. It may look like you have an infinite supply, but no, it's still limited. Just like the availability of Mr. Costa is limited by what we can pay at his hourly rate. That's something absolutely we have to consider whether we have an in-house or a contracted service. So I think that's important to consider. The other one is the idea of having a solicitor with roots in Fitchburg. And I think there's two different, I think you have to really split that. There is a connection to the community and there's familiarity. And familiarity can be learned. It's something that he's new to the city. He will absolutely learn where Ethier Street is, where other projects are ongoing, just by going through and doing the job, to being part of it. He will learn the backstory. When he's coming in, he's not going to know every single backstory of every single case, every single special permit we've approved. No lawyer would. Even someone down the street wouldn't do that. So there's always a learning curve to build familiarity, but that will come to anybody doing the job. But there is tremendous advantage to having someone outside who's not part of the community, because there are other factors that can influence the opinions given by a city solicitor. And when we look to a city solicitor for legal advice, we really need legal advice. It needs to be based on the rules, it needs to be based on law and legal opinion. When you have a local solicitor that's always influenced by personal relationships in the city and it's influenced by local politics. And if we're getting the best possible legal representation, we're not getting political decisions. We're not getting decisions influenced by the solicitor's neighbor or his aunt's neighbor, and these are all just hypothetical things. Because someone living in the city has personal relationships. Their decisions influence their neighbors, their friends, their family's friends. It influences their barber. It influences where they go and get coffee in the morning. So all of these things can influence the opinions that you get. So to have someone who is from the outside, who has a specialty in this type of law, not a jack of all trades, not a real estate lawyer, not a labor lawyer, a municipal law lawyer, who can look at the law and make purely legal decisions, is a tremendous advantage. And I think that serves the city tremendously, and it is a great advantage over having someone who has, quote unquote, roots in Fitchburg. So.
Councillor Kuchar?
With all due respect, Councillor Van Hazinga, I take offense to that as an attorney because we are trained and we are taught, and it's part of our job to, good example. I was approached by a young lady who had some legal issues with her family law, and I retained the case, and I worked on the case, and halfway through the case, I realized that the gentleman that she was having issues with was my next-door neighbor right two streets down. Did that affect me? No. I still had to do my job. I still had to do it well, and I did. So by saying that, and please don't take offense to what I'm saying. I understand it's a hypothetical. But a lawyer's job is to be, this is my client. This is what I have to do. And I can't be influenced because, okay, the father of my opponent or the defendant of the case, approached me saying, "Hey, why are you representing, my former daughter-in-law?" Because that's my job. She approached me first. I can't be influenced by, dad saying, "Well, I want this and I want that." Well, tough luck. I still have to do my job. So, I just wanted to get that out there. Not a bash at you, sir. I have no issues with that. It's just a lawyer is trained to, no matter what, have to deal with their clients first and not be influenced by anything outside of that. Not a neighbor, not a, we have a job to do, and that's what we're trained to do. I'd like to renew my motion to move the question.
May I ask, because I know I've been keeping Mr. Vera waiting for quite some time, may I ask permission to let him speak first?
Okay. So far, this meeting has cost us over $1,200. I just want to put that out there. So please, make it brief.
I just wanted to say that the Madam Mayor would love to be in attendance to every single city council meeting and every single committee meeting, but currently, tonight, she's at the Fitchburg Public Schools contract negotiations, which is very important and very vital. It actually costs a lot more than our current city solicitor or our former current city solicitor. So, former Mayor Dina Talley didn't attend every single thing because a mayor has other things to attend. So I just wanted to put it out there for everyone watching and the public. The mayor cares. The person you voted for to be in that seat cares. She just has other obligations currently. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
Can I just say one thing? And I just wanted to say that you've been in this position for 37 days, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
So I have a motion to move the question.
I'll second.
All right, I have a motion and second.
Yes.
Councilor Kuchar? Councilor Van Hazinga?
No.
I'll be yes.
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 All right, that does pass. So now we have the matter before us.
I have I don't know if it's a procedural question or, so we have a financial order before us. Mm-hmm. This is in legislative affairs, and that is, and it makes sense to have a discussion because it involves more than just the financial order. Mm-hmm. It involves, if we're going to go down this route, there are going to have to be changes to the city code to be consistent with how we're handling legal services here. But in terms of action by this committee, I'm not really certain as to or we're not approving a financial order.
We're making a recommendation whether to approve it or not, and then the Finance Committee will make their recommendation. The Council will hear both recommendations.
So we're not making any votes on specific changes to the city code?
No, none of that.
Anything. We are just whether or not we're going to approve a financial order of money that's already been budgeted to move it from personal services to just as law department expenses.
Mm-hmm. That is correct. That is what is before us. Do I have a motion on that subject?
I'll make a motion.
To do what?
I'll make a motion to move forward on the, I'll make a motion to move forward on the transfer.
Okay, to recommend the transfer.
I'll recommend the transfer.
And I have a second.
I'll second.
All right, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
In opposition? All right, motion fails by 2-3. If it is all right with the members, I will deem that to be a motion in the opposite direction rather than requiring someone to make a separate motion. So by a vote of 3-2, the recommendation is to not approve the transfer. That does conclude our business for the evening.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
I have a motion and second to adjourn. Seeing no objection, we are adjourned.